As we and our coalition partners are doing in Afghanistan, we will bring to the Iraqi people food and medicines and supplies and freedom.
So I believe that this is a fight for freedom, and I want to make it a fight for justice too.
September the 11th, 2001 dominates almost everything we watch, read and hear. We're fighting a war on terror, say George Bush and Tony Blair, a noble war against evil itself. But what are the real aims of this war? And who are the most threatening terrorists? Indeed, who is responsible for far greater acts of violence than those committed by the fanatics of Al-Qaida, crimes that have claimed many more lives than September the 11th, and always in poor, devastated, faraway places from Latin America to Southeast Asia? The answer to these questions is to be found here in the United States, where those now in power speak openly of their conquests and of endless war. Afghanistan, Iraq, these, they say, are just a beginning. Look out North Korea, Iran, even China. This film is about the rise and rise of rapacious imperial power and a terrorism that never speaks its name, because it is our terrorism.
This is Rita Lazar and her brother Abe. Abe was killed in the Twin Towers on September the 11th. He might have saved himself, but chose to help a disabled friend.
That my country was going to use my brother's death to justify killing innocent people in Afghanistan and wherever else they would look.
Rita decided to go to Afghanistan to comfort the victims of the American bombing. She met Orifa and took her to the American embassy in Kabul to seek compensation for the killing of her family.
And had been turned away and told, "Go away, you're a beggar."
The oppressed people of Afghanistan will know the generosity of America and our allies. The United States of America is a friend to the Afghan people.
Such a friend that out of $10 billion spent in Afghanistan in the last 2 years, the majority has been spent on the military. Of all the great humanitarian disasters, few countries have been helped less than Afghanistan. Only 3% of all international aid has been for reconstruction.
I've spent much of my life in places of upheaval, but I've rarely seen such a bombed and blasted and ruined city as Kabul. Most of the damage was done not by the Taliban, but by the Afghan warlords backed and trained and funded by America for more than 20 years. The same warlords who have been effectively put back into power by George Bush.
To a growing number of people around the world, America's war on terror is about hypocrisy and double standards, about terrorists classified as good and bad, depending on their usefulness to the great game of power politics. For years, Osama bin Laden was not only regarded in Washington and London as a good terrorist, he was virtually our creation. One of the most closely guarded secrets of the Cold War was America's role in supporting Afghan warlords known as the Mujahideen. The official story is that America backed these fundamentalists in response to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in December 1979. But that's not true. It was 6 months before the Soviet invasion, in July of that year, that President Jimmy Carter authorized $500 million to help set up the Mujahideen, a terrorist organization. Today, Afghanistan is run by a regime installed by the Americans, and the pipeline deal is going ahead. September the 11th also presented an opportunity to an influential group who, even by Republican Party standards, were extreme. This is one of their blueprints, published in 2000, by the extreme right-wing group Project for a New American Century. These are some of the countries where the United States, directly and indirectly, has overthrown governments, manipulated elections, and attacked popular movements since 1945. Bush's war on terror is just another brand name replacing the Red Menace as justification for a systematic aggression. This is well documented, yet it remains a kind of secret history, seldom reported in the West as a war of terror. Today, the United States has 152 military bases around the world. These include bases at major sources of energy, established under cover of the war on terror. These are the oil fields of the Middle East, the greatest prize of all. Iraq is the world's second biggest oil producer, and its conquest gives America a vast base from which to dominate the Middle East. It's been a conquest achieved at any price, including truth.
We were sold this war on the basis of Iraq possessing a massive arsenal of weapons of mass destruction, which was never found and won't be found because there was no massive arsenal of weapons.
You know, I never saw any evidence that would link it, and thus far there's been no evidence produced that would suggest that Saddam was behind Al-Qaida. In fact, my experience in the time I served would suggest the opposite, that Saddam was the least likely person to want anything to do with Al-Qaida.
If you really want to know the truth about the state of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction before the invasion, listen to Colin Powell in February 2001. He states clearly that there was no threat from Saddam Hussein.
He has not developed any significant capability with respect to weapons of mass destruction. He is unable to project conventional power against his neighbors.
And this is Condoleezza Rice, Bush's national security advisor, in July of the same year, saying the same thing, putting the lie to their own propaganda.
We are able to keep arms from him. His military forces have not been rebuilt.
And that, many believe, was the truth, a truth that was covered up and conveniently forgotten after September the 11th, when Bush and Blair decided to attack Iraq. They found no weapons of mass destruction, no links with Al-Qaeda, no nuclear weapons, no 45-minute threat.
Why is it wrong for dictators and terrorists to kill innocent civilians, and right or excusable for the United States to do exactly the same?
Well, the United States doesn't do it, and if we did it, it would be as reprehensible as what the terrorists do.
The American media played a vital role in the invasion and the deception. Instead of challenging the propaganda, it echoed and amplified it. If you were arrested in the United States by a foreign army and brought to a holding facility, wouldn't you expect to have certain basic rights, that is, access to lawyers, access to people outside, not just simply to literally disappear?
Both Bush and Blair are guilty and could stand in the dock, accused of waging aggressive war.
Aggression was at the core of the judgment at the Nuremberg trial of the German leadership following World War II.
The United Nations was founded so that we would never forget the crimes of great power. Are we now in danger of forgetting? Do we forget the lies that justified the conquest of Iraq and disguised America's plans to dominate all the world? Do we forget that the British government has announced, for the first time, that it's prepared to launch an attack with nuclear weapons, echoing yet again George Bush? And do we accept a distortion of intellect and morality that empties noble words like democracy and liberation of their true meaning, that says it's wrong for a terrorist to kill innocent people, but right for governments to commit the same crimes in our name? The answer is that we need not accept any of this if we recognize that there are now two superpowers. One is the regime in Washington, The other is public opinion, now stirring all over the world, perhaps as never before. Make no mistake, it's an epic struggle. The alternative is not just the conquest of faraway countries, it's the conquest of us, of our minds, our humanity, and our self-respect. If we remain silent, victory over us is assured.